It's not live. So today's Dharma talk is titled Why Shikantaza. Shikantaza translates out of the Japanese as just precisely this. And of course, so why? Why do that kind of meditation? Why not do shine and laktong? Or why not do creation completion practices, visualization? Why not do mantras? Why not do a lot of walking meditation in the forest with all your little friends? The rabbits, the ducks, and so on. Why? Why do that? Why sit down, hold still, and just observe? Why do that? So I've had experience. I haven't done every meditation there is, but I've done a lot of them pretty extensively. Some of them are very, very time consuming, and I'm not against those. I'm not particularly for or against, other than I am very much for Shikantaza. And I'm not teaching out of what I was taught directly. I am teaching out of what I was taught directly to look at. And that's what I've been doing. So that's where this teaching comes from. I'm not saying there aren't any other Zen teachers or Tibetan lineages, lamas and so on, that might have something that might align more with what you want to do with your life as far as a meditator. So I'm not trying to convince you or say this works better. But if you're listening to me, why Shikantaza? Why just precisely this? To start with, you can't do that. And so it is about observing that you cannot. It's about observing the failure, not about training your mind to be more mindful so you can get some kind of a conclusion that finally I'm so aware, I'm so mindful. You know, I used to be really give myself a hard time, used to be this and this and that, but I finally settled on it, finally at peace. And as I've said before, people around you that know that you've been meditating for 20 years wonder why you even get flustered with anything, because they assume that anyone who meditates that much is going to be at peace and at rest and maybe even have a gold leaf all over them. It's much more rough and rugged, and it's much more realistic than that. It's much more actual. It's actual. So why sit down and hold still? Why sit symmetrical? Because the mind is quite chaotic and very asymmetrical in our experience. I'm not saying it's actually asymmetrical. I'm saying in our experience, we're going over here, we're thinking about that, we're worried about this, and then we just about get that solved, and then some other aspect of our karma dumps on us, and then the self-centered mind, the ego mind, comes up against that or for that or ignores that, passion, aggression, and ignorance. And you cannot correct that. You can't fix that. You can't just suddenly become serene and sublime and peaceful, because there isn't anyone. There isn't a solid being. Your experience, I don't care how subjective and how much you think that you have your own little idea about who you are and little secrets you keep to yourself from others, because you don't want anybody to know how really difficult it is for you. So why Shikantaza? Shikantaza is a way. It's a very simple approach, technique, method, any kind of word you want to use. And it is going to show up differently for each person. Everyone here who's listening to this Dharma talk their sitting practice is going to be quite a bit different than the person next to you or someone else in the Sangha, even if you've both been meditating for 20 years. Length of time means something, but not that much. So why do this? Why not do a kind of meditation where you follow the breath, label thinking, and then when you have thoughts arise and return to the breath, why not try to make some kind of stability happen? You could. Maybe that will make more sense to you. I sometimes, depending on what's happening with a person, I might even recommend they do some practices like that for a while. So I'll try to go into this in a kind of a generic way, and hopefully there will be questions about your specific challenges or misunderstandings or understandings, what have you. And I would say that in order to get to know yourself, in order to find out why your ears are this shape, how you've been able to retract your horns so nobody can see them, even though you know you are a devil. You know what I'm talking about. It's not a joke. And I'm not accusing you of anything. You need to look at that area. And when you look at it, don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away. And the only way you can not accept it, not reject it, and not look away is to be persistent about it. Actually go in and continue to look, and then the awareness becomes how much you keep pushing on it. The awareness becomes how much you keep pulling on it. The awareness becomes how much you keep distracting yourself, or you just don't want it. The whole path seems to be filled with those various containments, elaborations, justifications, validations, and analysis. And it is not about stopping any of that. Very seductive to think, well, if I see this so clearly, maybe I can just meditate it away. Don't get rid of anything. The fundamental insight, the fundamental nature is that nothing is separate from anything else. It's pretty good news to know that you don't have to be somebody else. You get to be exactly who you are. That might be a little challenging because some of who you are, if seen when we start to look deeply into that area, can be very distasteful or could be embarrassing. What if other people found out about that? What if my teacher knew about that? Your teacher may already know about that, but she just won't tell you that because it's up to you to see it. She won't take your wisdom away from you by pointing out your faults. So go ahead, please.
I just had a couple of questions about what you said with just Shikantaza. You have some students practicing some other paths, not paths, but like astrology or deep consciousness or anything like that. So how do you include those practices in the context of the awareness practice, bowing?
The most important thing you can do is Shikantaza. I mean, I'm not doing away with anything else. I'm just trying to meet people where they're at. It's going to show up different ways. And so the most important thing you can do are your practices. Sit down, hold still, look at the wall, or look at the floor, or look at a tree stump. Look at something that is generally, specifically, not moving, so that you can have the eye consciousness can be open and on receive, but not too much is happening. The same way you would not crank your stereo up to listen to music while you're meditating. Not about feeling better. That's not a conclusion that's particularly good. So more specific questions. It doesn't look like it's that confusing to me. Astrology is astrology. Deep consciousness is another way of working with the consciousness. If someone is having that, their particular process is showing up in that way. But if someone else is not, I'm not recommending anybody study astrology. I say if you want to, go ahead. You can actually do that in the monastery. More? Jason?
I'm just wondering about a lot of these practices seem to be trying to answer why instead of what. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to bring the what into the why practice.
Sit a lot, because astrology is very seductive. It's many, many centuries of bringing together the symbolic interpretation of cyclic movement into the mind stream. And the mind stream just delights in this kind of stuff because finally I got something. Finally, I know that if the sun is in an earth sign and the moon is in a water sign and the angles between those are this or that or whatever, you can come to conclusions about it. The whole thing is made up for that kind of thing. It reinforces the self-centeredness without a sitting practice. It might be a pretty sophisticated self-centeredness that really understands different dynamics that are going on there. But understanding the dynamic that's going on and naming it or describing it or something is not realization. It's not insight. It's concepts. Even the whatever line of concepts you come up with, provisional teachings, all of those are concepts right up to the edge of the cliff. This is a spiritual path. It's not a path of gathering information so you know stuff, either about yourself or about anybody else. It's going to have some of that going on, but the main focus is for you, if you're listening to me, for you to see directly when you're walking down the hallway in your house, when you're looking out the window, to see nothing else. It has an experiential quality to it, but it's not an experience that you can gather or store or have a suitcase full of it. It's immediate. It's direct perception all the time from now on until this body goes back into the elements. And it's through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, it's through everything. It's happening all at once. And there's not even a conclusion that nothing is separate. That's just a teaching device. If you see nothing is separate, then there's no comment. So the astrology situation, or we're going to do other things. We're going to do the I Ching. We're going to do some numerology. I tried to start up one with the Enneagram. I think I was trying to get Shoka to study that, so that there could be some kind of a class on that, but that never came about. People have studied it a little bit, but it never showed up as people get together and talk about the Enneagram. It's a valid archetypal kind of construct that what these different things do is give you an idea all the different ways that things can manifest and make some kind of relative sense. Relative sense, but they're not ultimate. But more about that, Jadon. Those are good questions.
Jadon, bowing. Like for a while, you had me looking at the I Ching, and so you're asking a question and you're looking for an answer. But it seems that if you're coming through this from an awareness practice, you can't actually know something. The practice is.
Go ahead.
What are we trying to work with if it's not knowledge, Bowie?
It is knowledge. It's just that it's not knowledge that shows up as understanding something. If you understand something, then you've concluded something and you know something about something. And it's relative truth. I don't care how polished, how shiny it is. The fundamental teaching here in the Mahayana is everything is empty of your ideas, your conjecture, your opinions of it, including your ideas of me, your ideas of each other, your ideas of the last time you had a nightmare, your ideas about the coronavirus, your ideas about the entire political construct that's going on. I refer you to the Peloponnesian Wars. You know what I'm saying. I'm being a little silly, but on the other hand, this has been going on forever. There have been, what do they say in the Christian tradition? Wars and rumors of wars. Pretty well said. There's just going to be constant struggle going on. It may look really good. They might get things passed that work, that cause people for a while to settle down and get along for a decade or two, and then it starts to erupt again. And then other people come into this realm, the human realm, out of other realms. Who you are is discontinuous from the point of experience, but is continuous from the point of view of reality. The very word tantra means continuity. The very word sutra means stitches, sutures. Everything is hooked together, but it's not hooked together, because if you see what it is, there's no separate things to hook together. It is a realization. It is something you understand, and you understand it so completely, you don't care if anything else happens again. Because why? There isn't anything else. Everything that happens is perfect. Had somebody just ask me, I think it was 2:30, no, 4:30 in the morning. I got a question from somebody, a very simple, straightforward question about a situation that was very subjective. And my response was, it was perfect. I think it was a little later. I think it was 5:30 when I answered it. So it didn't wake me up particularly. So Shikantaza, so reflect on it for a minute. I'm going to act this out a little bit. Here you are, whatever your dynamic, your life, your friends, your relationship, your karma, the terrible thing that happened to you from what your brother did when you were 10, or how you were treated. And I have all kinds of stories, I'm sure you do, about your life and who you are and what your name is and what your abilities are and how you're really good at calculating this, but not so good at doing this or whatever. You have all this. Imagine with me here, you have all of this and you sit down, you hold completely still, and you do this for long periods of time, and you continue to watch or to observe or to receive that which keeps moving, which is the mind will keep tumbling and tumbling and tumbling. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to correct it. You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to get better. Seems to be necessary to see that, so that with your particular karma, whatever is happening with you, the leading edge of your particular favorite delusion or affliction, which could be any number of combinations. I think I read off a list the other day of in the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha goes down a big long list of things that you should give up on. Different way of teaching it. I say you don't have to give up on anything. You just have to see it, and it'll just it maintains its grip through being ignored, through it being objected to, or through being validated, or this is happening because of this, or because they did this. If you're having any emotion happen in your mind stream yesterday, last week, tomorrow, in the middle of this talk, this is not caused by anything else. If you think someone else is causing how you feel, you have work to do. And you may have a lot of work to do. I'm not talking about a couple of years. A lot of work. And that means that you're meditating every day regularly, and you're spending some time doing some retreat practice or doing block sitting. I mean, take this seriously or don't take it seriously. You can also do it on the outskirts of town. I stop out there every now and then in my old Chevy pickup. You're not separate from the 13th century. If you think you are, keep working on it. Time is something that is a construct that we bring about that convinces us that we're somebody, a living being, going through something that's called time and space. You can see this. You can see this. You can sit down every day and train your mind to watch what's moving, because what is moving is the very nature of confusion. So Shikantaza is kind of the ideal thing. I'm not saying that people who teach shamatha, vipashyana, or mindfulness awareness practices, that those people should do whatever they're doing, and they have their students that they listen to me talk, they would, run away screaming or throw their hands up or whatever. Oh my gosh, I need to go back and study with someone else. But imagine just for a moment all the things that have been going on with you. Let's just take the last week. Whatever's been happening in your mind stream of coming and going, and I'm getting somewhere, now I'm not getting somewhere. Maybe am I getting somewhere? Is this meditation working? Am I doing this right? I can tell you how to do it. Sit down and observe. If you add anything to what you're observing, this is confusion. If you take anything away or judge anything that is arising, this is confusion. And if you distract yourself from it, this is confusion. Ego does not want to do that. It wants to take a position on everything. I'm sure you've noticed, especially if you have an intense feeling come out of, what do they call it? Left field. Let's see, I think the left is that way. Comes out of left field. And we're so arrogant. We're so arrogant that we think if we're having an emotion, it must be caused by something. Have you noticed? I'm not saying it's not caused by something, but to think that you can figure this out, you can't. But what may happen is the self-centered mind, the ego mind, the narcissistic mind, the me and my stuff, me and my ideas mind, that will settle for something that is within your periphery, another person, an event, because it's close by. It just happened, so you get to blame that. And I'm not saying that it didn't possibly trigger it. Quite often, other people trigger emotions that we've been burying lifetime after lifetime. You know who you are, or perhaps you don't. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening to me. I say, don't believe a word I say, but consider what I'm saying. Consider it.
Shoto bowing.
Yes.
Can we use those triggers to investigate our positions?
Always. As soon as someone says or does something that causes a triggers or some kind of an emotion that comes up, just receive. Just receive. And if you can, don't blame. But if you do blame, then just receive that you're blaming. And keep it as simple as possible. And pretty difficult to keep it as simple as possible, or unless you're practicing, the way I teach it is just precisely this. And that, if you're doing that, then over time, you get very, you could say, good or adept or precise at being precise. You actually watch what's moving with no idea about what it is, where it's going, what it's called, what it points to. It's just that. It's just that emotion, just that thought. And it may be triggered by something, someone or something in your environment. This is a do-it-yourself project with the encouragement of someone who has spent some time studying this, namely this old lady.
Hakaran bowing. Is it possible that we might never leave Shikantaza?
Never what?
Off the cushion?
Never what?
Never leave
Yeah.
Shikantaza.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you realize that that's all there is, then there isn't anything else. Sometimes people will ask me, well, how much do you meditate, Shokazan? And I say, kind of puffing up a little bit, I say, I never stop meditating. Or I might say, depending on who it is that asks me that, I say, I'm not going to meditate. I hate to meditate. I stopped that years ago. I just teach it now. No position. You may meditate, you may not meditate. The boundary between meditation and post-meditation vanishes unless you continue to set it up with your opinions, your ideas, your judgments, and your divisiveness. I can only teach as good as my students. So come and get me. Drag it out of me.
So Kazan Hakaran bowing. How did the Buddha talk about tranquility? He talked about it a lot. How does that relate to what you're talking about?
He was meeting people, the society, and everything where it was at that time. So if you go and you read his teachings to any extent, which we assume these are his teachings, they're 100 years and sometimes more after he actually said something. So if somebody had to remember something, just like with other spiritual guides or teachers. So he seemed to be, if you read something where there's the Majjhima Nikaya, the Samyutta Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, or the other one I just mentioned a little bit ago was what's the name of the do you remember?
Sutta.
Sutta Nipada. That one's full of anecdotal stories about, we don't know if it's the attribution is actually the Buddha, could be, but very interesting. And it could be 15 different people all talking about the same thing in different ways. So there's all kinds of ways of talking about just, the Metta Sutta, which is actually in the Sutta Nipata. The Metta Sutta is just about being, this is something we read at when we do marriage ceremony, something that I think we sometimes do it at funerals, and sometimes it's people just like to read it because it's even in translation, it's a very genuine way of expressing kindness. So the Metta Sutta, kindness Sutta. So the Buddha is talking to who showed up in front of him. And as any teacher does, as Pema Chodron does, as His Holiness Dalai Lama, His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, and all the other teachers, even teachers in the Advaita lineages, Chan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Theravadan Buddhism, the translations we read of Bhikkhu Bodhi's work, who was a Theravadan monk. So all showing up in different ways. Very similar to this situation. My practice over the last quite number of years, from two different teachers, starting out in Zen and then going into Tibetan forms and doing those extensively, and then meeting Kobun and coming back into Zen forms and looking at those and feeling kind of lost. And until, when I say it felt kind of lost, until someone stopped fighting with everything. And that's why I often say, don't go to war with anything. Don't go to war with war. And one of the ways you can go to war with war is try to be peaceful. That's a misunderstanding, a big one. If you're listening to me, you need to hear it. If you're not listening to me, then you won't hear it. No polarity. And how do you do that? You have to look at the polarity, and you look at the polarity in your mind. Don't fight with anything. Don't do any, whatever's showing up in the mind, no matter how difficult or ragged or rough it is or emotional it is, you do nothing with it. You could even take the attitude, if you want to, especially if you receive these precepts to save all beings, you could receive that negativity on behalf of the world that is trying to shut it out. Just like others cannot receive these difficult feelings that I'm having on behalf of those who cannot do this, I'm going to take it. I'm going to receive this. I'm going to just feel this. Save all beings. Start now. A lot of work ahead of you. Further questions are good. Go ahead, please.
Lady Bowing, regarding the feeling lost, I'm finding the more I go on, the more lost I'm feeling. Does that go away? Am I doing this wrong?
No. Feeling lost, feeling found is a grasping situation. So feeling lost is it addresses more the tendency for one self-centered identity to try to cling or have a reference points or have a credential or have everything, even friends. If you're a student of the Buddha's Dharma, insofar as you can, your friends should be Sangha. It even says I was just reading in the Blue Annals, which is a history of Tibet, Tibetan practice, written by, it's a translation by George Roerich, and I can't remember the 14th, 15th century Lama who wrote it. But anyway, there was a time when a bodhisattva couldn't even hang out with a Shravaka more than 7 days. There was actually a rule he couldn't do that. This was in India, and this was in the 9th or 10th century. It's odd how things change like that. So the bodhisattva couldn't hang out with somebody who hadn't received the bodhisattva vow for more than 7 days. Imagine all the other rules and precepts and laws and things. If you read, well, as we were talking about the Sutta Nipata, which I couldn't remember the title of it, but if you read that, every one of those suttas in there is like going different directions about the same thing. So being lost, make that part of your awareness practice. How does that feel? Who is it that's lost? Is there someone lost? Is there a being, a solid being? The five skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness. Does that come together as a lump of somebody who feels lost? And then notice the duration of that. Notice that if you just observe that feeling of lost, does it get stronger? Does it get weaker? Does it do something relative to your viewing of it or receiving it? Or if you receive it, does it just keep supplying you with more and more lost? So lost. If you're doing that, you're probably explaining the lost feeling rather than receiving it. I'm not accusing you of anything, Katie. I'm just saying that if you say you feel lost, then there is some kind of imputation where you've left the feeling of being lost for the one who is lost. It's a very simple form of duality that captures most of us, and sometimes for long periods of time. Praise and blame does that too. If we're praised for something we're really good at, we cling to that. Or if we're blamed for something we're not so good at, which we may be doing to ourselves, we cling to that as an identity. I just can't seem to get this. No matter how much I practice, I still am just flooded with negative feelings and so on. Conclusion. Conclude nothing. And if you tend to spontaneously conclude this and conclude this, then just watch that. That's the path. This is the path of the Bodhisattva. This is the path of, depending on where you're at on the path, it's the path of someone who's searching. That's your landscape, is what that is. And if your landscape continues to be a landscape, as long as you don't grasp or reject or shut down, then everything continues to go, and you actually watch your karma moving towards you as a living being. We all have a lot of karma to deal with.
Michael Bowie. I have the feeling that I'm more in control. That seems to be the polar opposite of being lost. Is the idea of being in control any more real than the idea of being lost?
I can help you if you listen. If you're listening, and both of you, I can talk to you. I can answer both questions at the same time. Those two are not two separate things. Found, or control, and lost, no control. It's the very nature of duality. It's the very idea that reifies life and death, success and failure, war and peace. All the polarities are subsumed under those fields of lost. That's self. Someone who's lost. I'm in control. That's someone that's the other end of the spectrum. But those two situations are not separate from each other. Lost and found, control and out of control. It's it's pointed out in different ways in the sutras. If you read the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, or if you read the Sin Sin Ming, you read a lot, especially the Japanese and Chinese monk poets were very good at bringing words together, and then other people were very good at translating them, especially Red Pine. Taking these words and saying, it's like Nishikai's name, 2 arrows meet. I just talked to Nishikai for a couple of minutes, and I said, it's got to be 2 arrows meet. Can't be 1 arrow, because he doesn't know where he's going. And 1 arrow knows where they're going. So if you've received a Dharma name from me, you should contemplate that Dharma name. Because I'm pointing, well, you actually pointed to it, and then I just saw what you were pointing at, and then I wrote it down. That was your name. I already have Wendy's name. I just came up with her name the other day, but I haven't written it on her Roxu yet because I don't know how to spell what showed up. I mean, in Chinese, yeah, or Japanese. Maybe I'll do it in Sanskrit. That would be special.
Katie bowing, still
Yes.
regarding the feeling lost, where I'm experiencing that the most intensely is out in the world, like job and other responsibilities when people expect a lot of me
Sure.
and make a lot of demands, whether they're reasonable or not. And
Yeah.
my reaction is complete confusion and not really knowing my role or how to navigate it all and still be true to myself.
So watch that being
How to do that.
that you just made a comment. Be true to myself. Forget that. Okay. That's just you're talking about it. You're giving me permission to tell you, true to yourself. Please don't do that. That's not only a time sink, but that's an energy sink that will take your energy trying to be true to yourself, and there isn't one. And even the idea of truth is a relative situation, and until it becomes ultimate, or until one sees it as ultimate. So don't worry too much about getting yourself this way or that way, or be true to yourself. What should you worry about? You shouldn't worry about anything to start with, but receive. Sit down, practice receiving by watching your thoughts come and go, your emotions when you're facing the wall, and when you go into your environment, receive the environment, receive the criticism from people. I'm not saying you shouldn't argue with them or say, well, I don't think that's true, or I think I'm doing a good job. You should do that, but you have to really receive it. But don't lay on yourself the trip of being true to yourself. That would just that's just a highly polished form of narcissism. I'm accusing you of nothing particularly. I'm just saying that when you say that tells me that there's some kind of energy is going into protecting yourself rather than receiving. Protecting, I have to be true to myself. Everybody's doing that in some way, but not everybody will spit it out like you just did, so I can nail you.
So in my situation, I'm regularly being faced with attorneys and judges who demand the pretense of clarity. There's no room for not knowing. How do you recommend we work with people demanding that we pretend to know?
Go ahead and do it. I mean,
You broke up. Can you repeat that, please?
I can. Anybody remember what I said? Yeah, go ahead and do it. Just meet it where it's at. Sometimes meeting things where it's at might feel disingenuous, kind of like Katie saying, "I'm going to be true to myself." Don't worry about yourself. Don't worry about how you feel, how you appear. I mean, if you're worried about how you appear, then it just, I don't even know if I can help you with that particularly. Other than say, go into retreat, go sit and do a couple of block sits back to back, and then go back into that situation, so that you don't go into it with some kind of knowing about everything. We tend to proceed talking to somebody by things we know. We try to protect ourselves ahead of time. And one of the things you could do there is you could ask for help from the person that seems to be kind of persecuting you a little bit. You could turn the tables on them and say, it seems like you're pretty clear. I mean, you would have to come up with your own way of saying it. Seems like you have a lot of clarity around this, and I'm having a rough time with that. Could you help me with that a little bit? Very rare that somebody who is full of themselves, like judges and lawyers and people like that, generally speaking, not all of them, but generally speaking, wouldn't be ready to help you if you ask. And if you turn it around, because a lot of it is they pick up on you're trying to present yourself or trying to be somebody, and might be good to be more of a student in that environment as much as possible. I think you'd find that people really want to help you, but your particular style, since you're asking me the question, and this is not a compliment, it's a description, but you're really intelligent. You're probably more intelligent than the people that you're dealing with, and that shows up. They don't like it. So slow down, meet the person where they're at, which is in their idea of who they are. I'm the judge, I'm the lawyer, I'm the teacher. Meet them there. Don't meet them as someone who's kind of competing with them. Just a suggestion. We have plenty of time to be a smarty pants later. You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Yes.
Katie asked about the phrase "be true to yourself."
Yes.
She mentioned that. And you sometimes quote Trungpa and say, "Be genuine." So, what's the difference between being true to yourself and being genuine?
Being genuine is actually functioning with the neurosis you're trying to get rid of, which you have trouble doing specifically. And Katie wasn't asking about that. She was making a statement. How can I do this and be true to myself? She didn't ask about that so much. So therefore, since she's asking, I felt like I could go in and derail that a little bit. Don't be too preoccupied. But being genuine just means stop trying to get away from your neurosis and polish it up or be an extra special, enlightening person. If you feel better than anybody, if you feel superior than anyone or ahead of anyone, this is the very nature of narcissism, is to feel above anybody. This doesn't mean you have to go the other way and be all sheepish and have your head hanging down and stumble along. But you could be really aware of the whole identity project that's going on. When you meet people, notice the prejudice against others based on anything, not just skin color, but based on anything: height, sex, intelligence level, speech patterns. We're always trying to separate ourselves from others so we get a little bit of identity out of every encounter we have. Notice that. And what do you do with it? Don't fix it. Don't improve. Don't try to not be full of yourself, because that takes it to the other end. It's just a teeter-totter. I'm doing really well, and now I saw how full of myself I was, so now I'm going to be more humble. It's only about observing it. You can see it if you have a close relationship with your spouse or your next door neighbor or whomever it is, or your Dharma brother or sister. You'll notice that situation can get polarized really easily. Then we can be really upset with someone who really has not done anything to us at all, not even particularly triggered anything. But just notice, if you have a strong sitting practice, you may tend to feel less sure of yourself, more lost, like Katie is talking about. And I'm saying the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. This is about the basic misunderstanding in this spiritual path is a mistaken identity. So the feeling of being lost, I'm not saying try to be lost. I'm just saying don't cover that up too. Don't make friends with some kind of reference point too quick. You want a reference point? Try the wall. Not much is happening there, but we tend to project things onto it that probably need to be seen.
Akaran bowing.
Yes.
Is there a way to consider or think about self-worth without an identity? Akaran
bowing. The self-worth is just, everyone's worth something. Everybody's valuable. So to say it that way, start out with that. And then there's all kinds of levels of that situation. But I wouldn't spend too much time going with self-worth. I mean, if I did that, I'd have to just be really upset with myself for never getting a degree. I mean, I'm obviously really, really smart, but I don't have a credential. Don't I need a credential so people will believe me or do what I say or give me or feel that I have what they have a lot of, self-worth? The self-worth is, I'm not interested in self-worth. I'm not interested in that. What I am interested in is be genuine. Actually embody and be the garbage heap you're trying to get rid of. I'm not saying you're a garbage heap. I'm saying there's negativity. You wouldn't be here. You would not be listening to an old man in a funny suit talking if you felt like you knew what to do with your life and everything's going fine. You wouldn't be listening to somebody who is coming from a tradition that's thousands of years old, that is a spiritual path. I'm saying, get rid of nothing, but look at everything. Look at everything. Don't approve of it. Don't disapprove, and don't distract yourself or turn away. And the path will be seeing how much you do all three of those in different ways. And that way you'll find out what your favorite affliction is. And if you see it, then at some point in your practice, you'll begin to, it kind of turns on its own. You don't have to necessarily look back and say, is there anyone feeling this? Is there anyone thinking this? You could do some of that. Atma Vichara, as Ramana Maharshi taught in the early part of the last century, to look self-inquiry. Who is it? Who is having this experience? Who is having these feelings? To go into the identity part, because mistaken identity here and mistaken identity out there is the very nature of confusion and war and samsara and the constant churning of the six realms. And if you see it, if you see there isn't anyone, then things may still happen. They will, because there's still karma. You still were embodied. You were still born, still a human being here. But you're not separate from anything. You're not separate from any other being, no matter how horrible and evil, and no matter how holy and elevated. Not separate. But it has to be realized. It can't be just a thought pattern about it. Thought patterns about it might come up for someone who's teaching that, but the actual situation, not much to think about. It's just true.
Michael Bowie.
Sir.
Is it necessary to simplify in order to observe?
Well, that's the whole idea. Well, thank you. The whole idea of Shikantaza is simple. So you sit down, you hold still. It's simple. You already have your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. You already have all the receptors. Sit down and receive. Receive. As Dogen said in the 13th century, when you go out towards the world with your ideas and your preferences and your pushing, your pulling, and your judgments, your ideas, and your evaluations of this, that, and everything, this is the very nature of delusion. It's not that you don't have to go out and get some food. You have to do some of that, but that's situational. And so what he is basically saying, you go out towards the world, this is delusion. But when the world just comes to you, this is awakening. So this is why you sit down and do Shikantaza. Why you sit down, you sit in a symmetrical position. Very simple. Can't be simpler. It tends to get very complicated the more you do it, because your ability to receive the world gets more, shall we say, sophisticated. In other words, there's a lot less pushing against what's coming towards you. There's a lot less agreeing with what's coming towards you. And there's a lot less shutting off or ignoring or distracting yourself from what's coming towards you. So and the ego mind over time gets threatened by this, and it will try to get a credential out of how meditative you are. It'll try to get a credential out of, well, now I'm a monk, or now I have a Buddhist name or something. It's not that you shouldn't do that or have that, or you shouldn't do sitting meditation, and you shouldn't have thought patterns like that. It's about being aware of them. It's always about awareness, as I've said 50 times now, probably. It's about the space in which things occur, and not just the space. It is about the space. Here's a recorder, here's a coffee cup, here's a wooden stick. So, and there's a person, and there's other people. Phenomena, stuff, things, apparent things arising in apparent space. Simply put. So simplify, sit down, hold still, just observe. Now, you may do other things. You may study astrology, you may study the I Ching, you may study tarot cards, you may study enneagrams, you may study a philosophy or psychology or moral inventory or I mean, all the different kinds of psychologies that are out there these days. There's a couple hundred of them, I think, just in Wikipedia. Not wrong. You do whatever you like, but it would be a really good idea to hold still, as Michael was asking about, and keep it very simple and very direct. Just watch. So Sit in front of a wall, face a tree. You could actually look down at the carpeting in front of you or the linoleum, whatever you have in your kitchenette. And just observe, just receive, smell, taste, touch, hearing, seeing, smelling, thought patterns coming and going, phenomena coming and going, coming and going. And eventually, go ahead, Wendy. Wendy?
Do we need to understand people to meet them where they're at?
No, it's even worse if you understand them. It's even harder because then you think you know who they are, and they don't even know who they are. So no, you don't have to understand them. If you're on receive, then you're on receive. Then you're not going to have a feeling that you know. You might somebody that you've known for 20 years. If you really start to receive that person, you will know less about them as far as information or ideas and so on. Because just the receiving, it's like just receive weather. You don't know anything about the weather. You just receive the weather. And it doesn't mean that to some people there isn't some kind of stability based on personality, based on the particular passion, aggression, and ignorance that's operating in that particular individual. That will show up, but it'll be kind of secondary because nothing lasts. So even maybe they have a lot of frustration, they're having difficulty with their job. You'll just notice that that's happening. But who they fundamentally are is what is being encouraged to meet people where they're at. If you're meeting someone where they're at, you will have less understanding in the conventional sense of who they are and more I hesitate to use this word, but I'm going to anyway because nothing else is coming up. But more consideration for them. More, you could use the fancy word compassion. A more deep understanding of their dilemma and what they're going through. Especially if you finally, after all this time, not just you but anybody, of judging somebody and evaluating them, and even coming to relative conclusions that are pretty accurate. You probably could have 5 people all that knew that person agree. Yeah, that person is this and this and this. But if you're coming to conclusions about anyone, the ego mind may feel like you know more about them, but the actual compassion that comes out of wisdom will be modified or interfered with. It just will get shut down in the relative sense. More, Wendy?
Wendy Bowing. Is it necessary to be able to see things from another's point of view in order to meet them where they're at?
No. Look at your point of view and notice that you have a point of view. Notice your point of view. Be aware if you've met this person where you're at and you see that your points of view come and go, then no matter who you meet, you're always meeting yourself. It's not you, it's not Wendy, or it's not Sogazan, or it's not Shoka, but you're always meeting a version of yourself, because fundamentally things are not separate. They just look like they are. And the illusion, this is why it's called an illusion. We actually assume that we are a person living a particular life. A little bit. So to meet someone where they're at, you would just be at their service. You might ask them questions, you might not. You might just wait. If they're used to having you act in a different way, they may be upset by you not acting. You quite often in marriages, if one of the people in the marriage situation, not talking about you necessarily, but one of the people that in a relationship has been operating a certain way, one of the people just stop participating in the confusion. It doesn't mean there isn't still confusion there. They're no longer trying to fix the confusion. They're no longer accusing that person or themselves of perpetuating anything. They're just receiving what that is, and it may be pretty distasteful. But by doing that, everything starts to slow down, and the clarity around the situation seems to be free or released so that we can see more deeply, not ideas, opinions, judgments, evaluations, conclusions about anything, just more deeply into what this fundamentally is, which is my simple way of putting it. It's not separate. Looks separate, but it's not. And as I often say, don't believe a word I say. You find out. And I think you can do that. There's no guarantee, but by just sit down, hold still, face the wall, watch what continues to come and go and come and go. Don't saddle up any horses. Let them all just come and go. Don't ride anything out of town. Don't chase any rabbits. Don't do anything. Just observe.
Is on bowing.
Yes.
You said that if you think you understand somebody, like when he was asking, do you need to understand someone's point of view to meet them where they're at? And just to come back to this, when people use astrology to explain to me who I am, if that's not what astrology is for, what is that modality used for? Bowing.
It's for having fun. That's what I use it for. And I've been studying it since the mid 60s. But I understood, it dawned on me many, many years ago that this is not the solution to life. It's just more, it's circularity. I mean, it's even the very nature of it is circles. You know, the planets going around the sun. It's kind of a cosmic joke. It's just that sometimes when it's in an earth sign or when it's in a fire sign or when there's a 90-degree angle between two planets in a particular time, that certain kinds of energies may show up. But even if you know all this, and we have a few people who have studied astrology a lot, especially Sokoan, you know, it's interesting. It's fascinating material because it's showing you over and over again archetypal energy, fire, earth, water, air, pushing on something, stabilizing something, alternating something. There's all the energies are covered in those archetypes. It's fascinating material, but you cannot attain enlightenment by studying astrology. Just like you can't attain enlightenment by trying to attain enlightenment.
Michael, isn't the illusion of astrology that we believe that it's permanent and that it does describe us permanently in some way, when the illusion is that it is not permanent?
What is your question? It's a little vague to me. What is your question?
My question is, isn't the illusion that we believe things are permanent?
Yeah.
So how does Shikantaza pertain to this idea of that we have a permanency?
Well, if you practice Shikantaza, you'll see that nothing lasts. The very first teaching of the Buddha, one of them is the 3 marks of existence. Nothing lasts, or impermanence. Anything that shows up is going away, including astrology, including this body-mind complex. It might have some kind of duration, but not a lot. And it's slowly decomposing and going back. But who you are doesn't do anything. Your actual identity doesn't come and doesn't go. It just rides on that Mobius strip called a human life. Just looks real, feels real, smells real, smells like other, looks like other polarity. Me and that. And so this is why if you look into the I Ching, or if you look into the tarot cards, or anything that has any kind of cyclic movement to it that has to do with the various archetypes that are kind of built into the situation, it's interesting. It's fascinating material to look at. But it's not necessarily going to get you somewhere. So like to respond to Chazon, when people bring that up, just enjoy it. Enjoy. Say, tell me more. Say, could I win the lottery? And the person will immediately go to the 5th house and look at your aspects to Neptune and what ruled your 5th house caused. And they'll say, probably not. And then they might say, I don't know, which casino you're going to. I didn't say casino. I said lottery. Listen up, man. You know, see what I'm saying? You can get all involved in all kinds of things about, you know. Mhm.
Going back to Wendy's question,
Yes.
in that situation, who does the bodhisattva help then?
Well, the relative thing is to save all beings. As you know, you receive the bodhisattva. All things, whatever's happening, don't object, don't agree, don't look away. And if it manifests in the form of a human being, then insofar as you can, give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they're having difficulty. This doesn't mean let them rob you or swindle you or take advantage of you. You might have to be even impolite to them. So, but I'm saying meet everything where it's at, so you have as much possible understanding of whatever's happening with that person as possible. But you might not be able to see their point of view. The point of view is a relative thing, so we're not talking so much about a point of view as we are talking about, as a bodhisattva vow, is to receive the person. And the way you do that is not necessarily to get out their horoscope and describe that to them. Although, that being said, if somebody wanted to talk to you about astrology, as I said, it's fascinating archetypal situations that arise in terms of cycles and angles to each other. I've been fascinated by it for years and still look at astrology as far as cycles and so on. I don't particularly plan my future, maybe a little bit, but not much. So I don't do anything with it to try to manipulate or control. It might be more like, you know, if the sun is out, then I might go out and get some vitamin D. Might be very simple.
Ishwari, that still seems to suggest to me, at least probably a misunderstanding, a level of understanding where the other person is or where the other person is coming from. And whereas total receive seems to indicate just be open.
Mm-hmm. No. Don't just be open. Because when I say just receive, you're going to see how you can't do that. Whereas if you say just be open, then we tend to kind of pretend that we're open. We try to imitate or mimic what it would be like to be open and considerate and all of that. But to just receive, it may not show up to the other person at all that you're receiving. You may just be looking at them. Whereas being open, there might be some kind of a agenda about trying to make sure they know that you're open. Well, go ahead and tell me. I'm really open to this. So you have to watch that. You have to respect the other person's, confusion. You have to meet them in the confusion. And that doesn't mean clearing it up for them. If somebody is meeting with you and they seem to be confused, you're talking to them about something, don't correct the confusion by pointing out to them how they're wrong and also don't go the other way and totally agree with them. Don't do anything with it. You don't have to. If I'm sitting here and and a bird is outside the window chirping, I don't have to do anything. I mean, you just the sound comes through the window and you just receive what it is, and then I get a hold of Undo to find out what bird it was.
Maria Bowing.
Yes.
Is receiving diminishes a separation between the person who is in front of me and myself?
Does receiving diminish the
separation between
the
person and myself?
In a relative sense, you could say that it would, but you may not have an experience of it diminishing it because your own self-centeredness might be freaked out because of you're losing reference point. And so therefore, as far as the path, it's working okay, but as far as how you feel about it, you might suck. That's why I was saying to Katie earlier, just that feeling of being lost, don't cover that up. You could continue to look at it. And if you continue to look at anything you continue to look at, you're not pushing it away. You're not making excuses for it. You're doing nothing with it, not ignoring it. It won't last. It can't last. It gets its stability from being pushed or pulled or shut down on. You get the three poisons are operating there.
You used the word devil today. I'm just wondering what do you mean by devil?
Oh, a devil, like a really someone who is so flooded with negative energy that they feel somehow empowered to, be negative. It shows up in all kinds of things. It shows up in music. It shows up in the arts. It shows up in politics. It shows up it shows up in the spiritual path. So it's just a strong personification of negativity. There really are no devils. From the ultimate point of view, that's just a misunderstanding. It's just a way of talking about about energy that is that there's a lot of aggression or a lot of conflict going on. The Tibetans have a whole panoply of negative, but they've enlisted those negativities to protect the Dharma. So it's just another way of talking about it. It's just like in your own mind. If you're doing fine, you're doing your laundry or something, and then you just feel overwhelmed by some kind of negativity that seems to be coming through the walls or something. You don't know the causes and conditions that bring up any person's emotions or feelings or anything are just they're just untraceable. And it is I would say that is a waste of time. When I say waste, it's a way of talking about it. You can't really waste time, but it's kind of like we tend to go into that energetically and try to figure it out or stop it or do something with it because it doesn't feel so good. But through mind training, through sitting down and practicing over a long period of time, and I mean a long period of time, when negativity comes up, the negativity eventually will come up and it won't be able to find somebody that's having the experience. It won't have an identity. The experience will be there. It's called Rangjung, self-existing. The energy is there. It just shows up. It just shows up. You feel it. It hurts. It sucks. But there's nobody feeling that. I highly recommend that. But it's like telling somebody about the top of a mountain and they're not sure if they want to climb that mountain or not. But you can do it. If you're listening to me, if this old guy can do this, can have some understanding about this, that I can even sit here in front of people and tell you about it, encourage you, find out who you are. Don't follow me anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Not interested. Don't need followers. Don't need any kind of worshiping or adoration. That's more about you, not about me. I'm out of here. I mean, it doesn't look like it yet, but I'm gone. I left a long time ago. When I say I left, no, I didn't go anywhere, but there wasn't anyone, and there isn't anyone to go anywhere. Please ask me questions. If you don't understand, ask me. Go ahead, please. Jisho.
Yeah, going back to the previous question extending from Wendy's. So I think I understand what you're suggesting. It seems to be receive, but while being aware that you cannot receive completely or you cannot perfectly receive is the way kind of I understood. So there seems to be two things, receiving and being aware at the same time. Do they occur simultaneously? One precedes the other? Does it matter?
Same time. The operation, a good question. They happen at the same time, and the difficulty for the self-centered mind, the ego mind, is that it doesn't like that when two things that are different start to happen at the same time, because it loses its reference point on something else. But yes, you just receive it. It's not easy because it's not an accomplishment. It's just seeing what is already the case. It's already the case. As sometimes said, you're not separate from the Buddha. You're already awake. Already.
Michael Byron,
Yes.
is receiving outside of time or our concept of time?
I don't know. Maybe. Unya just pointed to her wrist. I think she wants to have carpal tunnel operation.
You have interviews.
Oh, I have interviews. Okay. Very good. So I'm going to give another talk this afternoon.
At 3.
So yes, I'll talk this afternoon at 3 if you would like to join. And I'll probably stay right on this in the same area, somewhat, maybe talk number 2 or something. Ask questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you, Shokuzan. And we'll be back for meditation